Hello, and welcome back to the library. The last time I was in the library, I was doing the Ray Feist video, which I will link somewhere up here. Turning up, I found some books that I apparently bought some time ago and never read. And I'm always looking for books to read. And I read these and I went, I need to make a video about this author. So here we are to kick off 2023 with a Dr. Wigo on books about the author Julian May. Now, you may not have heard of her because she wasn't that prolific. Well, actually, she was very prolific, but she was a nonfiction. She wrote like science encyclopedia articles. That was like how she made her living before she became a writer. As a writer, she didn't publish that many books before she sadly passed about 5 years ago. Now, I first was introduced to Julian May. It was when I was working on Wall Street, and I think it was my friend Kevin Flanagan, who I worked with on Wall Street, who told me about this book. The idea was that in the future, and by the way, I went back and checked some dates. Apparently, a time machine was invented like 10 years from now. Of course, now remember, she wrote these books back in the early 80s. But so like 2033 sounded like a long way away, but we're getting close. A guy invented a time machine, which was relatively useless because it only worked one way. You could send things into the past, but you couldn't get them back. And it got even worse because it turned out the only place you could send, there was only one place it would go. There was this one spot in the south of France 6 million years ago in the Pliocene era that was the place where it came out. Now, how they figured that out, you'll have to read the books because I don't remember, and it seems like that would be an odd thing to be able to figure out. So in the first book was called The Many-Colored Land. By the way, the guy invented the time machine like 10 years from now, but it's actually like 100 years later. So it's like in 2022 something, people started wanting to use his time machine because things had happened on Earth that people didn't want to stick around for. The world has gotten very complicated, apparently, and they figure, we'll go back to the past, and they finally set it up so that these people can take a one-way trip back to the Pliocene age, 6 million years ago. So all these people start going back to escape from modern reality so that they can be back in the past and live simply. And they're given training, and they're not allowed to take things that won't completely biodegrade within 100 years. So they can't take, metals, and so they're very restricted on what they can take with them. But they're training them so that they can maybe live, be able to farm and do stuff. One-way trip. No one in the future knows what happens back there. No one comes back to tell them, because it turns out, and this is where it really gets good, and you find this out early in the book, so I'm not spoiling a lot here. 6 million years ago, there's people living there, and they're not human, and they're not from Earth. So aliens have like crash landed on Earth 6 million years ago. They see all these people as slave labor that are, look, free slaves coming through, popping up out of nowhere. It's a really complicated story, and it goes back, starts in the Many-Colored Land. Then it continues in the Golden Torc, because these aliens wear these gold things that help amplify their psychic abilities so that they can control the humans. And eventually they invent other kinds of, in fact, I think a human invents other kinds of torcs that help them control animals and humans. It continues into a third book that came out in 1983 called The Nonborn King. Did I mention the aliens were having trouble reproducing on Earth because of solar radiation and stuff? But it turns out that we were somewhat genetically compatible, not really, but enough that the women that come through from the future find themselves in kind of an alien version of The Handmaid's Tale, and they're forced to become broodmares for these aliens, who then discover, I think that at first they're just growing alien babies inside them. They're like surrogates. But then they find out, we can actually mix our DNA, and things get really interesting. The fourth book of this saga, The Adversary kind of is a guy from the future who has psychic powers, And by the way, if you had psychic powers, you weren't supposed to be allowed to go back into the Pliocene. But he somehow snuck in. And of course, now he is taking on these aliens. And I mean, it's a big, sprawling saga. And I remember loving it. Now, again, I read this in the 1980s. So I don't remember all the details, but it's a lot of characters. It's a great story. But the part of the story that interested me the most was you get these hints and snippets and things of where they came from, the future. And that place sounded pretty damn interesting. Well, apparently, Julian May felt the same way, because in 1987, the book Intervention came out, which is set back in the future, which, because of time travel, it's technically a sequel and a prequel. A lot of the stuff that happens in that book is before people start getting sent back. So it's a prequel, but of course it's then also 6 million years later, so it's a sequel. Intervention was the title in the UK. It was one book. But in the US, kind of like with Ray Feist's first book, they split it into one called Surveillance and another one called Metaconcert. The Surveillance is the alien races of the galaxy surveilling the Earth, trying to decide if we're worthy of joining the big galactic milieu. And then the Metaconcert is after the Intervention, when they announce themselves and we find out that we're not alone in the universe and all this stuff. All of this big story is just to set up the next set of books, which are called the Galactic Milieu trilogy. Although, see, because Intervention isn't technically part of it, it's like the bridge book between the Saga and the Milieu. The first book of the Galactic Milieu trilogy is called Jack the Bodiless. These books, and it started, by the way, it started all the way back in the Pliocene Exile books. There's a family, the Remelards, who are like the super psychics of the world, of our world. It's the story, the saga of their family, and because as more and more of their children and grandchildren are born, they have more psychic powers. Jack the Bodiless is, like, I think he's the grandson, but he's born, and I can tell you, I loved this kid. He was the most wonderful, and by the way, and his health is horrible, and these horrible things are happening to him, and it's clear he's going to die, and it's so sad. Keep reading. It gets even more interesting. He eventually becomes known in the future books as Saint Jack the Bodiless. Kind of gives you a hint right there, Jack the Bodiless. He's going to become a pure mind. Then the next book, Diamond Mask, is, don't hold me. It's either Jack's aunt or maybe one. Anyway, it's another member of the family. By the way, there's some bad psychics running around. It's quite the adventure. This female member of the family helps this, but in the process of saving them from this horrible thing, her face gets damaged, and that's why she wears a diamond mask to cover the scars on her face. The final book of the Galactic Milieu trilogy, Magnificat, kind of brings it all together. It gets incredibly complicated. The one thing that I remember, and I remember this, I read these books in the 80s when they came out. They had these things. They were like self-driving Ubers, except they weren't cars. They were like little eggs. And you'd climb into the egg, and it would launch itself into the stratosphere and supersonically and then land. And basically, you could go anywhere in the world in minutes with these supersonic eggs. And they're like cabs. They're like Ubers. You just get in and take where you go. I wanted that so bad. This is 2 pretty big clunks of books. And if you get through all those, you say, well, I want to read more. Well, be careful what you wish for. At the same time that Julian May was writing these books, the Galactic Milieu trilogy, she was also collaborating with Marion Zimmer Bradley and Andre Norton. The 3 of them wrote a book called Black Trillium. Pure fantasy. This is not... The other books, all the books so far were hard science fiction. This is fantasy. And it's these 3 sisters, hence the Trillium. And the conceit of these books, though, is that the 3 of them wrote the first book together, but then they each wrote a sequel, but the sequels were not connected. They were like different stories. So there was Blood Trillium, which was Julian May, and then there was Golden Trillium, which I don't remember which one. It'll be here. It'll be here on the screen. And Lady of the Trillium, Julian May came back and wrote the last book, Sky Trillium. I liked these books. I enjoyed these books, but I'm not strongly recommending them. I'm just saying, yeah, if you like fantasy, you might get into them. I strongly recommend the Pliocene Exile and the Galactic Milieu. Those books just expanded my mind. I was amazed. So after her little foray into fantasy, which by the way paralleled the writing of the Galactic Milieu, so she was writing hard science fiction and fantasy at the same time, she decided to go with her next books were going to be more hard science fiction, but she set it in a different universe. The Earth is now the Galactic Empire, and it's a mystery. This guy, these things happen to this guy, and he gets exiled to this far planet. Well, that's the Rampart Worlds. That's the name of the thing. And the first book, Perseus Spur, is where the guy gets exiled off of Earth out into the Rampart Worlds. And then in the Orion Arm, the mystery deepens, and he's looking and he's trying to figure out someone's trying to kill him. So again, it's a murder. It's kind of it's a espionage thriller in outer space, but not in the same universe as the Galactic Milieu. And then finally, Sagittarius Whorl is the third and final book of this trilogy. It just gets weird. It turns out there's these aliens that are coming in, and the Earth, the people that are running the Earth, the Galactic Empire for Earth are like selling out humans. It's a Robert Ludlum in outer space trilogy. I found it entertaining. Not sure you would. The next set of books, which came out in the mid 2000s, the first one was Conqueror's Moon. Now she's gone into pure fantasy. This is swords and sorcery. It's clearly not even Earth, because there are all these other species living on whatever the planet this is. But there's magic and different kinds of magic. You may have figured out a thread here that I love books that have magic, especially different forms of magic. That's why I like Brandon Sanderson, because he has several different kinds of magic in his different series. This is a different kind of magic. But Conqueror's Moon came out in 2004. Ironcrown Moon, which came out 2005. And more amazing things happen. Oh, there's kings and princes and intrigue, and they're great fantasy novels. And finally, the third book, Sorcerer's Moon, is the thrilling conclusion that ties up all the things. I just finished these. I love them. I strongly recommend start with the Pliocene Exile, then the Galactic Milieu. Then I would say go with these. The Boreal Moon trilogy. It's great fantasy. Then, if you're more a fantasy person, go back and pick up the Trillium books by the 3 different female authors. If you're a hard science fiction fan, mystery fan, go back and do the Rampart Worlds. But I gotta tell you, the Boreal Moon, great fantasy. Now, if you want truly great fantasy, go over here, Ray Feist. Go watch that video. Don't even watch the video. Just go read the books. Start with Magician. He's the really great author. Julian May's good, but Ray Feist is phenomenal storyteller. But I said all that in the other video. Go, read, make your New Year's resolution to read a bunch of books, and you can start with these. Start with Ray Feist. Got Neil Stevenson. I'll have my other Dr. Wiggle on books linked below. Got a couple other authors you might like. So go read some books. But for now, have a happy new year. I hope you have a fantastic new year. Start the new year reading. That's it for me. Thanks for stopping by. Bye-bye.